Let's just put that accusation that we heard from Michal straight off the bat.
With the murder of two people, Jews, praying on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar on Yom Kippur in Manchester, then leading to protests essentially in support of their murderers.
Her saying, and this is being replicated in some quarters, that somehow those who were turning up at the weekend were doing so in some way in support of what we saw this week.
Yeah, I'm still trying to recover from your previous guest, to be honest. Look, I don't have much to say to unhinged supporters of genocide who make civilizational clash claims. But I do want to say she would, of course, as you heard, she denies the idea that a genocide is taking place and certainly would say, I'm sure, that she would not support one. But well, the accusation that the people showing up to pro-Palestine demonstrations are somehow celebrating the horrific murders in Manchester the other day is an absolutely vile, disgusting accusation. That's the only response I have to your previous guest. Sorry, it was totally unhinged and incoherent, and I don't respond to people like that.
We have seen, I mean, I would agree it was pretty incoherent. Saeed, though, we have seen there is, I think, a more reasonable and thoughtful critique that we've heard from others, including the Home Secretary over the past few days, who, of course, asked you and others not to protest this weekend, which is to say that after the most horrific incident of violence that we've seen against Jews in this country, that you know, and we all know, that even though, of course, logically and rationally, you can and indeed must separate British Jewry from the events from the actions of the Israeli government and what is going on in Gaza, nonetheless, there will be an enormous number of people, British Jews, who are scared and worried, who would feel aggrieved that those protests were taking place this week in the immediate aftermath of that. Would it not have been a sign of grace to decide not to have those protests this week?
Well, you made the point very precisely. I mean, I don't think the Home Secretary's response was more reasonable, but I think that her and the Prime Minister conflating the actions of British Jews and the actions of the Israeli government is extremely dangerous and irresponsible. And that is the anti-Semitism that they are accusing us of. I also think they are attempting to somehow divide Britain's Jewish communities into those who are allowed to mourn and those who aren't. Some may have wanted to stay home and mourn silently, of course, but there have been thousands joining the marches, and there have been hundreds participating in the Defend Our Juries campaign.
Aren't the feelings and emotions sometimes of others more important than our own internal political imperatives? Yes, you and I can sit here, or you and I might decide that, yes, there is a proper delineation, of course, between those two things. But wouldn't it have meant something to a lot of people for them not to go ahead? And isn't that worth more than just exercising that right at that moment?
They're not others. I'm saying to you that the movement itself, Defend Our Juries, includes hundreds of people from Britain's Jewish community.
I understand that.
So those are people who can make the distinction between the horrific murders in Manchester and what's going on in Gaza, that they can simultaneously mourn the murder of British Jews here and the murder of Palestinians in a genocide in Gaza.
But you also know as well as I do. You also know as well as I do that on some of these things, I'm not saying I wasn't on Saturday, I have though been to some of these protests in the past, and anti-Semitic things can be heard and are heard sometimes. A minority, for sure, but it is there. We've seen placards including saying things like globalize the Intifada and so on. These things are highly provocative to British Jewry and to many people within British Jewry. And therefore, in the week of the most heinous, horrendous, violent attack that we have seen against British Jews, surely it might have just been a good idea, just this once, for it not to go ahead. Could you not have found that within yourself?
It's not about myself. This is not an individual decision.
Yourselves.
It was an extremely peaceful and respectful and silent protest. And unfortunately, as much as we're horrified and we condemn the attacks in Manchester, unfortunately, the genocide in Gaza continues and Britain's participation in the genocide continues.
That is Saeed Taji Farouky there, Defend Our Juries spokesperson, attending Saturday's protest. I should say, of course, as always, the British government denies that it is involved or complicit in any sort of genocide. Let's turn now to Danny Cohen, former director of BBC Television, now president of Access Entertainment, has written about these matters in the past. Danny, thanks so much for joining us this morning. What did you make of what we just heard?
Well, I would advise anyone to read the piece today in the Sunday Times by Matthew Saeed, a very thoughtful journalist and columnist. He attended that march, which has just been described as peaceful and silent, and he continuously experienced virulent anti-Semitism. Time and again, he sounds like he was horrified by it. So the idea of what happened yesterday at that march was just a peaceful march, against the Israeli government and the situation in Gaza is just not factually true from what I just read from a very respected journalist. The second thing to say on it, and I think this is being missed a bit in the debate, is when the Metropolitan Police asked for this march not to go ahead yesterday, they also made the point that it would take policemen away from other duties this weekend in protecting the Jewish community around synagogues and others. And my understanding is that that was also made clear to the organisers of this march, that please, on this occasion, given what's happened on Thursday where Jews were murdered in a synagogue, please let us use all of our resources that we can to protect Jewish people and protect synagogues and so on. And the answer to that was no. So it's not just about the decency and grace that you've referred to in challenging the last interviewee. It's also a matter of resources, police resources, national resources, the taxes we all pay. And for me and for many Jews, the fact it went ahead was disgusting. And our feelings that there are really serious issues of anti-Semitism on these marches can be read very clearly in Matthew Said's piece today.
I put that point about security to the Home Secretary. She confirmed indeed what the Met said. I suppose what those who turn up say, and in fact I know this for having interviewed them before on this matter, is that they say that they didn't ask for Palestine action to be prescribed. It is the prescription which leads to the biggest devotion of police resources, because you basically need 5 people every time you need an arrest. The police don't have a choice. So their response is, well, if you don't want to use all those resources, then don't arrest us.
Let's remind ourselves why Palestine action was prescribed. There was an incident involving a British military base and vandalism at British military base, along with other evidence. The government took it seriously. They made that decision. We all have to live by the laws of the land. That's our basic commitment to each other. That is now a law of the land, and people can either choose to break that law or not. And if they choose to break it, it's going to require significant police resources. So I don't like the laws of the land, therefore it's not my problem. I don't think it's a very, very reasonable argument.
Can you address, because I think it is a reasonable point, albeit, as you heard, one that I was trying to sort of get to the heart of with the previous interviewee. It can be said, and indeed we heard it from him, that one of the problems, and indeed one of the problems it is itself potentially anti-Semitic and problematic, is the elision between Israel and British Jews. The idea that very often that British Jews are forced to reckon with or answer for what Israel does, which is clearly unreasonable. But nonetheless, then, they would say, or protests say, then if that is the case, then surely we must be able to protest about the actions of the Israeli government without it being inherently anti-Semitic or inherently anti-British Jewry. That logically must be the case, mustn't it?
Yeah, I think the right to protest is enshrined in our democracy and must remain so. But since the very day those marches started, there has been the presence of poisonous anti-Semitism. And every week that goes by where Jewish people see evidence of that anti-Semitism on the marches is another cut to the heart of Jewish people. And if those marches had purely been a democratic right to protest against a war, fine. But it's happened every single week. We see it again and again and again. We see Jewish memorials to the October the 7th attacks vandalized.
If that's the case, Danny, why do there so many? There are British Jews that turn up to those marches.
I can't speak for them.
It would indicate that a good proportion is not anti-Semitic.
But no one has said that everyone on those marches is anti-Semitic. No one's ever said that. What they've said is that every march has included people who have expressed anti-Semitic views, weaponizing Holocaust imagery against Jews, which is extremely painful, open anti-Semitism, as Matthew Said experienced yesterday at the march. No one is saying that everyone on those marches, it would be a bit like saying that everyone in the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn was anti-Semitic. Of course they weren't. But that doesn't mean there wasn't an institutional problem of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party under his leadership. So I think no one is saying those things, and we have to be careful, of course, to be clear as that as Jews and anyone else. But it doesn't mean that the situation has not been that week after week after week, Jewish people have had to put up with marches in our cities which have included virulently anti-Semitic elements. And by the way, there are people broadcast elsewhere who have tried to cover for some of that by trying to say things like global intifada isn't a call to attack Jews around the world, that from the river to the sea is not a statement about the destruction of Israel. Of course these things are, and I'm afraid people in trying to defend the right to protest have mixed that up with ignoring calls, public calls to kill Jews.